All right, we've made it to the final biological molecule, and this one's called ATP, which stands for adenosine triphosphate. And it's important we know about this because this is the universal energy currency. This is why we eat foods, because all the energy that we consume, we're breaking that down in the chemical reaction of respiration. And one of the outcomes of respiration is we're getting ATP. So once we've got ATP, we can do lots of things, and lots of things that require work. So muscle contractions, any type of movement really. So that could be cell division as well. Making things, building things, for example, for synthesis, it could be protein synthesis. These things they require ATP to do that. Moving things in and out of cells. Not all things are passive, like diffusion. Active transport, if you want to move things against their concentration gradient, that will require ATP as well. And nerve transmission, there's a huge amount of ATP is needed, having to pump sodium and potassium ions against their concentration gradients. So ATP, this is going to be a really easy one for you to draw, because if you remember doing nucleotides, then this is pretty much the same thing, just a couple of small differences. So if you look at this here now, that it says ribose, it says adenine, and it's got one phosphate. Hopefully you'll recognize that this is an RNA nucleotide, and the RNA nucleotide has the base adenine. So ATP, if you can draw this, then you're more than halfway to completing your adenosine triphosphate. All you have to do now is add 2 more phosphates. That's why it's called triphosphate. That is the ATP molecule. So quite easy, really. So if we break down different parts to it, this bit here, well, we call that adenine. If we put adenine and ribose together, we call that adenosine. And then if we do all 3, well, that would be adenosine triphosphate. And well, you can have it with just 1 P. We'd call that adenosine monophosphate if it was 1. And if it's 2 phosphates, we call that diphosphate, which is 2. So, how does this give energy then? What is it doing? Well, it's one of its properties. I mean, you could use energy from glucose directly, but it'd be very inefficient because there'd be a lot of heat loss. So the good thing about this is it gives a very small package of energy, and it gives, just double check, I've forgotten the number now, 30.6. Let's write that down. 30.6 kilojoules per mole. So just 30.6 kilojoules. That's a small little package of energy in comparison to something that like a glucose molecule would give. So a typical glucose molecule, when it enters respiration, by the time glucose gets broken down, you end up with about 36 ATPs. So now that means you've got 36 little small packages of energy, as opposed to glucose just being all the energy being released in one go, and you'd lose a lot of heat if that happens. So how does this work? Well, this here, ATP, there's our ATP, it's got the 3 phosphates. In order to get the energy from it, what's going to happen is this final phosphate here is going to be hydrolyzed, which means, I've done this a few times now, it's really common in biological molecules, water has been added to that bond and it's breaking it. And to break bonds, that actually requires to break this bond, it will require a very small amount of energy. It's quite an unstable bond, this. So, but a little bit of energy is going to be needed. But when this phosphate here binds with another molecule, when it bonds to something else, well, when you form bonds, that's going to release a lot more energy than was needed to break it, and it's going to release this much here, 30.6 kilojoules. So we've only got about 6 or 7 seconds worth of ATP stored in the body, so we're constantly having to replenish our stores. So there's respiration is constantly taking place in our body, and respiration is going to provide the energy to be able to put this phosphate back. Once that's been used, it's gone from ATP to ADP, adenosine diphosphate. So if we want to get this molecule to be useful again, we need to be able to add the phosphate back on, and that's why we're respiring. Once that's been made, this is useful again, and it can enter anything where it's needed. For example, like we said, nerve transmission, muscle contractions, active transport. So really important. That's constantly being replenished. So if we're going to form that bond during respiration, well, that's going to be a condensation reaction. Breaking it is hydrolysis, back and forward, condensation, hydrolysis. Okay, and when we need to add this phosphate on, well, we say that it's been phosphorylated. So, for example, I could say this: ADP, which is adenosine diphosphate, that's 2 phosphates, plus 1 inorganic phosphate, 1P, well, that's going to give us ATP. And this process of adding the phosphates, this is called phosphorylation. The ADP has been phosphorylated and it's been turned into ATP. Right, so what makes ATP good as well? Some of its properties are it's really small, so it can enter any cells, it can enter the organelles, it can be produced in places like the mitochondria, so it can get anywhere where it's needed. It's water soluble. Most metabolic processes are taking place within an aqueous environment in our bodies, so the fact it's water soluble means it's there all the time to be used. It's easily regenerated. So ADP can be turned into ATP very easily, and as I said before, because it's releasing energy in small quantities, it's very efficient. We're not losing much energy in the form of heat. Okay, so one thing just to make sure you can do, would you be able to draw an RNA nucleotide of adenine? Would you be able to draw a DNA nucleotide of adenine? And are you able to draw ATP? They're all really, really similar. They look the same, but it's about how you label them as well. How is it going to be different? So if you can do that, that's great. Being aware of the properties, make sure you remember them. This top bit's easy, I think, because it's just, we know that ATP is involved in anything that requires energy. So just being aware of, there's lots of things our body's doing that's requiring energy all the time. All right, see you later.